Today, we're diving deep into a secret language, one that's being spoken inside your body right now. It's the language of your immune system, and it's this constant chatter of molecular messages that really decides if you stay healthy or get sick. So we're going to learn how to translate this language, a language written in molecules called cytokines, to understand, how our bodies orchestrate the literal fight for our lives.
All right, so if you've paid any attention to the news over the last few years, you've probably heard this term cytokine storm. It sounds pretty dramatic, right? Well, that's because it is. It's what happens when your body's internal communication network just goes completely haywire. But to really get what the storm is, first we have to understand the language that causes it in the first place.
So, what exactly are cytokines? Well, the best way to think of them is as the words and sentences of your immune system. They're these tiny little proteins that your cells release to send messages to other cells. And these messages can be anything from attack or fall back to, hey, we need backup over here, or okay, everything's cool, heal this tissue. They are absolutely central to how your body coordinates its own defense. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the basics of this secret language. Then, we'll meet the molecular messengers themselves, the actual words. After that, we'll see how cells receive the message, how doctors are now decoding these signals to save lives, and finally, we'll take a look at what the future of immune health is shaping up to be.
First up, immunity's secret language. See, just like any language, this whole cytokine network has its own vocabulary and, believe it or not, its own grammar. And understanding these rules is the absolute key to figuring out how your body stays healthy and what's really happening when it gets sick. Now, normally, this is all a very local affair. Picture one cell kind of whispering instructions to its next-door neighbor. That's how cytokines are supposed to work, a quiet, controlled conversation happening in a specific part of the body. But when a really severe infection hits, the whole system can get totally overwhelmed. And that whispering turns into a system-wide shout, with a flood of cytokines pouring into the entire body. That is the cytokine storm, and it can cause some really devastating, widespread damage.
Okay, so if cytokines are a language, what are the actual words? This brings us to the vocabulary of your immune system, the molecular messengers themselves. And just like words have different meanings, different cytokines have very different jobs. Getting the balance right between them is, well, it's everything. To make this easier, let's just give these key players some personalities. First, you've got the alarm. This is a cytokine called TNF-alpha, and its job is to just shout, "Intruder!" to get inflammation started. Then you have the traffic cops, a whole group called chemokines. They basically create these chemical highways to guide immune cells right to the battlefield. And just as important, you've got the peacemaker, IL-10. It's the one that says, okay, all clear, stand down. It's the brake pedal that stops the immune system from causing more damage than the bug itself. So we've got the words, but how do cells actually hear them? How do they understand the message? This brings us to the grammar of immune signaling. A message is pretty useless if the person you're sending it to can't read it, right? Well, our cells have this incredibly sophisticated internal machinery just to make sure the message is received loud and clear. And this breaks it down perfectly. It's basically a four-step process. First, the cytokine, the message, docks onto a specific receptor on the cell's surface, kind of like a key fitting into a lock. Step 2, this flips an internal switch, which kicks off a kind of relay race of signals inside the cell, often through a system called the JAK-STAT pathway. Third, that signal gets relayed all the way to the cell's headquarters, the nucleus. And finally, the nucleus issues new orders, activating specific genes that tell the cell exactly what to do next, whether that's to divide, to attack, or even to self-destruct for the greater good.
Okay, now this is where it gets really, really cool. Let's talk about decoding these life and death signals. Because understanding this language isn't just some academic thing. It's actually allowing doctors to solve critical medical puzzles and save lives every single day.
Let's start with a classic medical problem, tuberculosis. For decades, the standard TB skin test had this one massive flaw. It would come back positive if you had a real TB infection, sure, but it would also come back positive if you just had the common TB vaccine. It literally couldn't tell the difference, and that led to so much confusion and a lot of unnecessary treatments. So then came the IGRA test, which is just a brilliant use of the cytokine decoding idea. Instead of looking for some vague immune reaction, this blood test listens for one very specific cytokine word, interferon gamma. What it does is it takes a patient's blood and exposes it to these little protein flags that are only found on the real TB bacteria. Now, if the patient's elite soldiers, their T cells, have seen the real bug before, they scream interferon gamma. But if they've only seen the vaccine, which doesn't have these specific flags, they just stay quiet. And here's the crucial part. The test gives a clear, objective, numerical answer. If the level of that interferon gamma in the blood sample is above 0.35 international units per milliliter, it's a positive. End of story. There's no guesswork, no ambiguity. That's the power of actually translating the specific language of the immune cells. And this exact principle became incredibly important on a global scale during the COVID-19 pandemic. As doctors were desperately trying to figure out why some patients got just a little sick and others were fighting for their lives, they found a massive clue in the cytokine language. It turned out one particular word was being spoken way, way louder in the sickest patients. And that word was interleukin-6, or IL-6. I mean, look at this chart. The correlation was just stunningly clear. Patients with low IL-6 levels, they tended to have mild disease. But as the IL-6 levels went up, so did the severity of the illness. The patients with the absolute highest levels were at the greatest risk of needing a ventilator. So measuring IL-6 became this incredibly powerful tool to predict who was heading for serious trouble.
Okay, now picture this scene in an ICU. A patient is crashing. High fever, blood pressure dropping, organs are starting to fail. What is going on? Is it sepsis from a bacterial infection? Is it a crazy reaction to a cutting-edge cancer therapy? Or is it something else entirely? They can all look identical on the surface, but the treatments are completely different, and giving the wrong one could be fatal.
This is where a cytokine decoder ring comes in handy. By measuring a whole panel of these chemical messengers, doctors can tell these deadly conditions apart. As you can see here, each one has its own unique signature. Bacterial sepsis, that's often marked by high levels of IL-1 beta. The cytokine release syndrome from cancer therapy, that's characterized by that interferon gamma we keep talking about. And that other rare syndrome, HLH, it has a crazy tell, an absolutely off-the-charts level of an iron-storing protein called ferritin. This isn't just about getting a diagnosis, it's a roadmap to the right treatment right now. So all this brings us to our final section, the future of immune health. We're really starting to move beyond just translating single words. We're now learning to understand entire conversations, entire paragraphs. We're truly on the path toward fluency in the language of our own cells. And the big idea here is moving towards something called immune signatures. So instead of just measuring one thing, like IL-6, the goal is to measure a whole panel of cytokines all at once. This gives you a much, much more complete picture of what the immune system is actually doing. It really is like reading an entire paragraph instead of just pulling out a single word. And it allows for these incredibly precise diagnoses.
And the technology is finally catching up to the science. The next huge leap is going to be rapid point-of-care tests. I mean, imagine being able to get this complex immune signature not in a few days from some central lab, but in minutes, right there at the patient's bedside. This could totally revolutionize how we manage critical illnesses like sepsis. Which leaves us with one last and pretty hopeful question. We've learned to decode the messages that signal a coming storm. So as we get better and faster at this translation, as we become truly fluent in the language of our own bodies, the ultimate goal starts to come into view. Could we, one day, intervene early enough and precisely enough to stop the storm before it even begins?